we have this remarkable life in front of us, and this is actually part 2 of this man's life. We started last week by getting a peek into this man named Solomon. He was king over the nation of Israel, became king when his father David died. And last week we looked at one of the things, perhaps the thing that he was known most for, and that was his wisdom. But this week we're going to look at something that's actually kind of unusual. In fact, some people are kind of surprised that it's in the Bible. It's something else that King Solomon is known for, and it's a piece of literature that he wrote. It's found in your Old Testament, and it's the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, Ecclesiastes is a Greek word. It's a Greek translation of the Hebrew word Koholeth, which means professor or preacher. And so if you think of Solomon as a professor who is about to give a lesson in how to live life, you'll begin to understand what this book is about. Now, at first reading, the book seems kind of depressing. It seems like you're reading the diary of somebody who needs some serious counseling. I mean, listen to the words of the book as it begins. He says, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." Now, the word vanity literally means meaningless. He's saying everything is meaningless. Verse 17, he says, "I feel like I'm striving after the wind." In chapter 2, he actually says, "I hated life." People are left saying, wow, does the Bible really say this? The Bible really does say this. This isn't the kind of literature that you're going to break out at a dinner party. In fact, one of the commentators that I read actually said, well, here's the thing. You see, Solomon was just having a really bad day, and unfortunately, he had pen and paper in hand, and this is what came out. That commentator couldn't be more wrong. If you understand what's happening, the cause behind this writing, this book opens up a depth of understanding, a profoundness of life that will absolutely and totally transform you. The challenge is in understanding Solomon's approach. So let me set it up by saying this. If Solomon is a professor giving a lesson about how to live life, just know that good professors get you to think things out for yourself. Great professors actually attach life experience to that and give you an even deeper understanding, deeper insight still. I'll give you an example. I actually had a professor at ASU, psych professor, who looked like a homeless person. His hair was totally unkempt. His clothes were absolutely ragged. He wore flip-flops. His feet were filthy, and he would come to class like this every day. But he did it for the purpose of experimentation. He would check himself into psychiatric hospitals and become a first-hand observer, an eyewitness to what it was like being treated. Then he would come to class and say, "Class, let me tell you what it's like on the inside." And it was fascinating. See, the best teachers get you to think things out for yourself, but the very best attach to that their own life experience, and then bring that to you and say, "Here's what I learned. And here's what you can learn from my experience." That's exactly what Solomon does. Think of it this way. He's about to take the stage, but before he takes the stage, he visits you in your seat and he says, "Let me just tell you what you're about to experience. In Act 1, you're going to see me play the part of hedonist, and I'm going to do it better than anybody who's ever come before me. I'm going to do it better than anyone who's ever lived. I'm going to play the part of the hedonist. And then when I'm done, I'm going to step off the stage and I'm going to tell you what I learned from that. And then there's going to be Act 2. And I'm going to step back on the stage, and I'm going to play the part of super achiever, overachiever, and I am going to achieve more than any man who has ever come before me. And then I'm going to step off the stage. I'm going to tell you what that experience is like. Then there's going to be Act 3. I'm going to get back on the stage, and I'm going to gain more wisdom than has ever been gained by any man. I'm going to enjoy life more than any man has enjoyed. Then I'm going to step off the stage, and I'm going to tell you about that experience." If you see the book of Ecclesiastes as the professor about to tell you, "Class is in session. Let me tell you what it's like to live life," and here's a key phrase you have to understand, "for everything that is under the sun. That phrase is mentioned 30 times. And what it means is this: earthly things, things of this earth, contrasted to eternal things, the things of heaven. So in other words, this is a very not just hedonistic, but it's the kind of lifestyle that essentially says this: this is all there is. This is all there is. What we have here and now on this planet, this is all that there is. So since this is all that there is, let's go for it. Let's eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow we die. And by the way, you don't have to be an atheist to live your life like this. In Solomon's day, there were no atheists. Even in our own time, the percentage of people who claim to be atheists is very small. But this is an outlook of those who essentially live an atheistic lifestyle. It's the outworking of one who says, well, there is no eternity, there is no God, so I'm just going to live life for the here and now. That's the first thing you need to understand from Solomon's point of view. The second thing is this: through this whole thing, this whole test, this experiment, he's going to use this phrase, my wisdom stayed with me. So in other words, what he's saying is, look, I know that I'm stepping into this role and I'm going to play this part very well, but I haven't forgotten that this whole thing is an experiment. It's a test. In fact, in chapter 2, verse 1, he actually uses that word. He says, I tested myself. And then he says, but my wisdom stayed with me. So in other words, if you see me playing this part and you might think, wow, he's totally caught up in this thing. He says, no, not completely, because my wisdom has stayed with me through it all. In other words, I know that this is an experiment. And I'm living life this way to see what I can learn. And what I'm after is this: is there any meaning at all when you live your life for the things that are under the sun? Is there any meaning at all? Because if there is, and if there's any way to find it, it'll be me. It'll be me. So here's the first test. He launches into what I call the pursuit of pleasure. And he digs in quite hard. Ecclesiastes 2, verse 1, it's on the back of your notes. He says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. Here's the outworking of it. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I search with my heart how to cheer my body with wine. Oh, and by the way, lest you forget, my heart still guiding me with what? Wisdom. Not totally detached here. I remember this is a test, this is an experiment. And I searched with my heart how to lay hold on folly, foolishness, till I might see what was good. That's what I'm after. What is the good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life? He said to himself, enjoy life. Enjoy its pleasures. Now, you may be sitting here thinking, what kind of earthly pleasures could an ancient king possibly enjoy? Let me just tell you this. You don't have a clue. You don't have a clue what kind of pleasures Solomon had at his fingertips. Let me help you try to understand it. In 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 20 through 23, we read this. Judah and Israel were as many as the sand by the sea. Several million people under his leadership. They ate and drank and were happy. Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines and the border of Egypt. The borders are wide and far. He's actually experiencing a great deal of peace. All of these people brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Now, listen to this. This is Solomon's provision for one day. One day. This is for him, his household, his entourage. Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour. That's about 60 gallons. And 60 cores of meal. 10 fat oxen. 20 pasture-fed cattle. 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fat chickens. This is enough food to feed well over 10,000 people. This was the man's provision for one day. Picture Solomon sitting on his throne, which is made of gold. He's got jewelry and bling that would make Liberace jealous. You know what I'm saying? Gold rings, precious gems. Picture him sitting back on his throne. Got a big old cup of wine in his hand. He's got the meat sweats. And that's day one. And this is day in and day out. And millions of people are paying him tribute. And the man says, Act 1, enjoy life. The wine never runs out. The food never ends. Then he says, okay, from there I moved on from the party scene and I set my sights on accomplishing things. I put my hand to work. I built stuff. Built a lot of stuff. Verse 4, I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. Okay. We're told that it took 14 years for him to build his own house. It took 7 years to build the temple of God. I just planted a winter lawn. I mowed it for the first time a couple days ago. I was so proud of myself. Solomon visits me. He's like, are you joking? Come see my personal forest. Oh, and the pools that I made to water the forest. Then he says, after I did all this, you know what? I decided to kick back, and I decided to enjoy all that I had. And I wanted to have even more opportunities for enjoyment than any man before me, so I went after it. Verse 7. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I mean, I love just the understatement of that. 1 Kings chapter 10 tells us that the taxation amount and the homage brought to him by foreign kings totaled what would be the equivalent today of over $1 billion. Year after year after year, this was brought to him. Solomon is one of the richest men of all time. In fact, in 1 Kings 10, it says that in Jerusalem, gold and silver were as common as pebbles. I got singers, both men and women. Hey, if there was a band that I liked, I didn't buy the album. I bought the band. And I had many concubines, which is the delight of the sons of man. Well, I tell you, if there's one thing men like, it's women. I had concubines. We're told he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. So I became great. Truth be told, surpassed anybody who came before me in Jerusalem. But look what he says. What's it say? But my wisdom remained with me. Don't lose sight of the fact I still understand that this is all an experiment. It's a test. I've still got my wisdom with me. I haven't forgotten what this is all about. And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure. And my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. He says, I had people waiting on me hand and foot. And then when the massages were over, then the sex happened. And it was with every size, shape, hair color woman you could imagine. I had it all. Hugh Hefner just died recently. He visits Solomon and he bows down to him. Solomon's compound would make the Playboy Mansion look like amateur hour. This is a guy that had it unlike any other. And look what he says in verse 10. He says, here's one thing I learned. I had a good time. I got to admit that it was fun There was pleasure to be had. But as he steps off the stage and evaluates it all the partying, all of that stuff. Verse 11, then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had experienced in doing it, and behold, all was vanity, meaningless, a striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained, here it is, under the sun. He says, the first week of partying was actually pretty fun, but then things got really old. They got boring. Okay, this is it. A couple months of this, and we're at the pinnacle, and this is it. This is really getting kind of old. I love his description of it. Striving after the wind. It's so good. The wind is something you can feel. Now try to catch it. Try to catch it in your hands. As soon as you try to catch it in your hands, it's gone. It doesn't last. It's hard to wrap your hands around and keep it. You realize you can't. It fades as you reach out for it. So the pleasure experiment actually results in Solomon being frustrated and discontent. Now, let me pause and say, this is not to say that pleasure in and of itself is bad, right? Because if there's one thing Christians get tagged for is, it's God is a God that's, going to break your legs and, make you play the piccolo for the rest of your life, right? That's what it means to be godly. No. Pleasure is good. In and of itself, it's not bad. I'll prove it to you. Go back to the very beginning of God's design. What did God do? He created this unbelievably beautiful environment, the Garden of Eden. Then he takes man and woman and places Adam and Eve there. And then you know what he tells them? You're naked. You're naked. Then you know what he tells them? Make babies. Make babies. That's pleasurable. Pleasure is God's idea. Here's the point. This is a test, and here's what the professor's saying. If you live for pleasure, if you live for beautiful surroundings, you're in trouble. You will become frustrated because it's one after another, after another, after another, and it's meaningless. Why? Because you see, this is under the sun stuff that we're talking about. And it was never meant to fill that void in your life. Well, it was. We'll get to that in a second. So how do you know if you are living for those kinds of things? Simple question. What would it do to you? How would you feel, like deep down in your soul? How would it feel if you didn't have that thing? If you didn't have that possession? If you didn't have that environment, whatever, that house, the car, whatever it is, how would you feel if that was taken away from you? Would that just lay you low? Could you just not imagine your life without it? Probably an indication that you're living for it. So the pleasure experiment leaves him unfulfilled, but he's not giving up. There's more to pursue. Next up is wisdom, verse 12. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. So he says, here's what I learned from this part of the experiment. It is better to be wise than to be a fool. That it is better to live life in wisdom rather than foolishness. But then he has this thought, and yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For of the wise as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten, how the wise dies just like the fool. Well, we've talked about this before. When's the last time you had a stirring conversation about the influence of your great-great-grandfather in your life? Oh, by the way, what's his name? You say, well, time out. Come on now. Be real. You can live your life in such a way as to be an influence on others that's positive. Yeah, for how long? Till the next World War? He says, so I hated life. Why? Because what is done under the sun was grievous to me. Isn't that interesting? Now he's stepping off the stage and he's saying, this is pointless. It was the search for meaning, and I'm so empty. This is so frustrating. Everything is meaningless and a striving after the wind. Context under the sun. Applied himself to learning. He realized the same fate overtakes the fool and the wise. Both are planted in the ground. All your accomplishments, all your accumulations, in the end, it's true, you can't take them with you. In fact, they're so meaningless that you realize all of the work that you do, a lot of that, we're on the verge of it's probably the greatest wealth, it is, I would imagine, it would be the greatest wealth transference the world has ever known from the baby boomers to their kids. What is it, 50, 60 trillion dollars about to be transferred over. Verse 18, I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. What is it? Transitional wealth, generational wealth that's handed down, typically does not last more than 2 generations, and it's gone. See, he will be the master of all for which I've worked, and used my wisdom under the sun. So this also is meaningless. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. See the phrase, how he keeps saying it? Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not work for it at all. This also is vanity. It's evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. You work for the enjoyment of someone else. That person might be wise or foolish. I was thinking about the founders of Princeton, Yale, Harvard. All the blood, sweat, tears, and money they gave to those institutions to get them off the ground. You know why? Because it was to educate young men in what was at the time considered the queen of the sciences, theology. If those men were alive today and attending those universities, I promise you, they would want their money back. It's toil. It's meaningless. It's like a vapor. Here, then gone. It's like a chasing after the wind. So he says, for all your work, here's what you get. You get a lot of anxiety in your life. That's what you get. You get a lot of anxiety, and in the end, it really goes nowhere. So we began by saying that under the sun is a key phrase. The lesson is this: if you're living for what is under the sun, if this life is all we can know, and you base your meaning on what is in the here and now, what is on this planet, if you are a naturalist in that sense, a secularist, a hedonist, then you have no satisfying life, and you will never find meaning. And you will be frustrated. Ask the atheist why we are here, or even the naturalist. The evolutionist Stephen Jay Gould responds, we are here because one odd group of fishes had a peculiar fin anatomy that could transform into legs for terrestrial creatures. Because the earth never froze entirely during an ice age, because a small and tenuous species arising in Africa 250,000 years ago has managed so far to survive by hook and by crook. We may yearn for a higher answer, but none exists. In other words, he's saying, even the planet itself, nature, it gives you no meaning. We're here by accident. You die, and then you become nothing. Now, what's interesting is that Gould acknowledges, gosh, this sounds kind of depressing, but he tries to find meaning and give you hope by saying, yeah, but here's the thing. In between birth and death, you get to choose what kind of meaning you want to have in life. You get to pursue what this world has to offer. The professor comes to the stage and says, step aside. Let me just tell you, you can't find meaning there. I tried it. And I tried it more. I played that game better than anybody who's ever lived. Doesn't work. The professor shows you it doesn't work. Viktor Frankl was a prisoner who survived the concentration camp. He said some people inside the camp, interesting observation, some people inside the camp were just kind of like zombies. It's hollow, empty. Other people joined forces with the enemy. And then there were some who managed to have this spirit that was alive, and it kept them going, and they stayed strong. The answer? it completely and totally was dependent upon what they made their meaning in life. Because if the concentration camp could take away your meaning in life, you were done. So if you were living for sex, power, romance, fame, whatever it was, the concentration camp, the death camp, stripped that away from you completely. And you were left with nothing. But it was those who had faith in God that remained strong. Why? You build your life on anything under the sun, it will be taken away from you. Eventually, ultimately, even upon your death. He says, you have to discover meaning outside of yourself. It cannot be found under the sun, but rather what is above the sun, because that can never be taken away from you. So in the final verses, he says, let me tell you where joy is found, verse 24. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in the toil. This also I saw, look at this, is from the hand of God. Now this is interesting. This is the first time God is mentioned now. Now he's bringing God into the picture, but in what way? He's saying, look, the only way for you to enjoy things on this planet is to see them as a gift to you from God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one, what Caleb said, this is really good. What Caleb said up here to you is really profound. You know, what his wife shared was really profound, because what's she saying? God will provide, right? That was what she heard. God will provide. These are people that have nothing. They get some granola bars, right? And what do? This is from the hand of God. How much more enjoyable is this? God provides what we need when we need it. This is what a gift from God. You view things like that, then you begin to really enjoy them as gifts. This also I saw is from the hand of God, for apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge, and look at this, joy. But to the sinner, that is the one who is living for life under the sun, he's given the business of gathering, collecting, and then only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and is striving after the wind. So he says, now let's try this whole scenario now with God in the picture, and then things begin to change. You begin to see things as gifts from God. God gives us satisfaction. My birthday was yesterday, and I love being with my family and opening gifts. I like getting stuff. I do. I like getting stuff. Okay, but you know what I like more than getting things? I like giving things. I realized yesterday I actually like it more when I give a gift to a family member and I get to see them tear into it and I get to see their happiness. Their happiness becomes my happiness because I get to see them enjoying the gift that I've given. To see them happy is for me to be happy. And this is really how you know that you love somebody, and this is how God loves you. Because God has given you a gift in his son, Jesus Christ. God has given you a gift, it's going to sound weird, in futility. Because when you see the futility in life, that is meant to redirect you and steer you to what will give you meaning, purpose, and joy in life. In the email, I never got more feedback than the email I sent this week, so I'm going to have to quote it. Here's the reality of our situation. None of us buys a new car because the old one is just totally broken down and won't move anymore. None of us remodels, none of us buys a new home because the home we're currently in falls down to the ground. None of us, and I'm using the word us, not you, us, myself included, none of us buys new clothes because the clothes we currently have are threadbare. We just don't. And here's what ends up happening. We have made our lives frustrating and meaningless and boring by acquisition. Don't die chasing your own tail. Don't do that. Don't die on the treadmill. You know those little hamster wheels that go round and around and around? Whatever it is that you're running, that wheel is like spinning and spinning and spinning. There's some golden carrot out in front of you. You get to be 20 years old and you think, I got to have a 10-year plan. Okay, I got to acquire stuff. I got to get more. You get to be 30 years old. Okay, hey, I'm not doing too bad. What's the next 10-year plan? I'll be 40. Okay, 10 years. Okay, I got to get this amount. Okay, all this is going to give me safety, security. It'll give me meaning. And then all of a sudden, another 10 years, another 10 years, another 10 years, another 10 years, and then you die. They paint your face with makeup, plant you in the ground. Meaningless. Because the entire existence has been for one that is under the sun. You know why all this stuff is so frustrating to us? Ecclesiastes 3:11 says that God has placed eternity in our hearts. That's why. But we try to fill that void of what is above the sun. We exchange it for what's below the sun. And it doesn't work. It never fits. It's that God-shaped void that just doesn't fit with anything other than God. So here's the next step for you. To think and pray about what it means for you to take the next step to live a life of meaning, not futility. And the one I'm going to encourage you to take is relational. God is a relational God, and he calls his people to be relational. Personally, the most meaning I find here on this planet begins right here, vertical, my relationship with God, and then it becomes horizontal, being in relationship to the people around me. That's why we have community groups. And I couldn't encourage you more to be part of a community that expresses the one another's of Scripture. That's where real meaning and purpose, that's living for something above the sun rather than below the sun. If you're not involved, I want to encourage you to prayerfully consider taking that next step in doing that. That's where transformation comes in a way that brings meaning to your life. And so with that, the professor would say, class dismissed. Let's pray. Father, what powerful words. Thank you for bringing this message into my own life and my own heart. So easy to get sidetracked by the pleasures and begin to live for those things. But God, reorient us back to what Solomon reminds us of, that so many of us have even experienced. That God, we would live not for what is below the sun, but for what is above the sun, and therein find meaning and purpose. Ultimately, as we see Jesus on the cross, the greatest gift you could give us, understanding your love for all of us. That's where it starts. And for that, we are grateful. We ask it in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. And God's people said, amen.